The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Liv Morgan's desk as she stared at the email that would change her life. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words again. Congratulations. We'd like to offer you the position of lead anchor for the Morning Pulse. After 10 years of grinding through local news stations, writing stories that nobody read, and fighting for every tiny opportunity, she'd finally made it. Her boyfriend Max's cologne announced his presence before his hands landed on her shoulders. "What's got you so intense, babe?" he asked, leaning down to peer at her screen. A successful commercial actor with several national campaigns under his belt, Max had been auditioning for major film roles lately, though without much success. "I got it, Max. The Morning Pulse position, they want me as their lead anchor." Liv's voice quivered with excitement as she turned to face him. For a moment, something dark flickered across his handsome features before being replaced by a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's incredible," he said, his grip on her shoulders tightening imperceptibly. "How did you manage to beat out all the other candidates?" The slight edge in his voice made Liv's stomach clench, but she pushed the feeling aside. "Remember those investigative pieces I did on corporate corruption? Apparently, James Chen, the executive producer, was really impressed by my work." "James Chen?" Max's voice took on an odd tone. "Isn't he the one who was at that industry party last month? The one where you spent an hour talking to him while I was networking?" "It was maybe 15 minutes, and it was about journalism ethics," Liv replied, feeling defensive without quite understanding why. "You know how passionate I am about that topic." Max walked to the window, his back rigid. "Of course. You're passionate about a lot of things lately. Especially when they involve successful producers. What's that supposed to mean?" Liv stood up, her celebration moment souring rapidly. "Nothing." He turned back with that camera-ready smile she'd seen him practice countless times in their bathroom mirror. "We should celebrate. I'll call some friends, make it a real party. You deserve it." Something in his tone made Liv uneasy, but she nodded. This was her moment, and she wouldn't let anything dim it. As Max pulled out his phone and started texting, she noticed him smirking slightly, but dismissed it as a trick of the light. The celebration that evening at their favorite rooftop bar started wonderfully. Their close circle of industry friends gathered around, ordering champagne and sharing stories. But as the night wore on, Liv began noticing strange undercurrents. People would stop talking when she approached. She caught snippets of whispered conversations that died as soon as she got close. Sarah, a makeup artist who worked with Max on commercials, was particularly odd. After several glasses of wine, she kept giving Liv pitying looks. When Liv finally cornered her in the bathroom, Sarah avoided eye contact in the mirror while reapplying her lipstick. "Is something going on that I should know about?" Liv asked directly. Sarah's hand slipped, leaving a smear of red across her cheek. "I shouldn't say anything," she mumbled, frantically wiping at the streak. "But, if it were me, I'd want to know what people are saying." "What people? Saying what?" Sarah's eyes met hers in the mirror, filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "About you and James Chen. About how you really got that anchor position." The world seemed to tilt sideways as the implications sank in. Liv gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white. "Who's saying that?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. As Liv stormed back to the party, she saw Max holding court in the center of a group, speaking in low, conspiratorial tones. Their eyes met across the room, and in that moment, she knew. The man she loved had just destroyed everything she'd spent a decade building, all because he couldn't handle her success. The real question was, what was she going to do about it? The call came at midnight. Liv was still awake, pacing her apartment, replaying the evening's events in her head when her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Rachel Martinez, a junior producer at Morning Pulse who had been one of her strongest advocates during the hiring process. "Liv, I'm breaking protocol by calling you," Rachel's voice was tight with tension. "But you need to know, there's an emergency meeting tomorrow morning about your position. The rumors, they're everywhere. Social media, industry chat rooms, even some blind items on gossip sites." Liv sank onto her couch, the city lights blurring through her tears. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that 3 major advertisers have called expressing concerns about the show's image." Rachel paused. "James Chen is furious. Not at you, he knows it's all lies. But the network executives are spooked." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Rachel added softly, "I thought you deserved a warning before walking into that boardroom tomorrow." After hanging up, Liv sat in the darkness, her mind racing. The text messages had been pouring in all evening, colleagues, friends, even distant acquaintances all asking variations of the same question: was it true? Had she really? She couldn't even bring herself to finish the thought. Her phone buzzed again. "Max, can we talk? I feel terrible about everything." Liv's hands shook as she texted back, "Come over." 20 minutes later, he was at her door, his perfect hair slightly disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. "Baby, I'm so sorry," he started. "I had too much to drink, and people were asking about your new job, and I got jealous. You know how hard I've been working for my big break, and then you just what?" Liv's voice was deadly quiet. "Just earned it. Just spent 10 years building my reputation. Just did the work." Max ran his hands through his hair, pacing her living room. "You don't understand what it's like for me. Every audition, every callback, seeing younger guys get the roles I want. And then you're having private meetings with powerful producers." They were interviews, Max professional interviews in office buildings with HR present. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "But you knew that, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were implying when you started those rumors." His expression shifted, something calculating replacing the contrition. "Maybe if you had been more supportive of my career instead of always focusing on yours." "Supportive?" Liv laughed bitterly. "I helped you run lines every night. I took extra freelance work to help pay rent when you turned down commercial gigs because they weren't prestigious enough. I've been nothing but supportive. And now you're going to be a star," he spat. "Morning Pulse has 3 million viewers. Everyone will know your name, while I'm still doing deodorant commercials." The truth of their relationship crystallized in that moment. Every time she'd dimmed her light to make him comfortable, every achievement she'd downplayed, every opportunity she'd hesitated to celebrate, it had never been enough. He didn't want her support, he wanted her submission. "Get out," she whispered. "Liv, come on. Get out." She grabbed the nearest object, a framed photo of them from happier times, and hurled it at the wall. The glass shattered, a spider web of cracks spreading across their smiling faces. After he left, Liv sat among the broken glass, her mind oddly clear. Tomorrow, she would walk into that boardroom and fight for her career. But tonight, she had another task. Opening her laptop, she began to write, "An open letter to the man who tried to destroy me." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, years of investigative journalism experience guiding her as she documented everything, the manipulation, the jealousy, the calculated destruction of her reputation. She included screenshots of texts, dates of meetings, witness statements. By dawn, she had more than an article. She had ammunition. Rachel called again just as the sun was rising. "Liv? There's something else you should know. Remember that expose you did last year on casting couch culture in local theaters? I think I found a connection to Max that you're going to want to see." The morning boardroom felt like an execution chamber. Liv sat ramrod straight in her chair, facing the panel of network executives whose expressions ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile. James Chen sat at the far end, his face unreadable. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Miss Morgan, the network's head of programming, began, shuffling papers she knew contained printouts of the rumors. We have some concerns about recent allegations that have come to light. Before we continue, Liv interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'd like to share something. She pulled out a USB drive. This contains documented evidence of a systematic campaign of defamation, including time-stamped messages, witness statements, and recorded conversations that prove these allegations are false. The room fell silent as she connected the drive to the presentation screen. Over the next 30 minutes, she laid out her case with the precision of a veteran journalist. The timestamps showing Max's escalating jealousy. The witness statements from colleagues who'd heard him deliberately spreading lies. The documentation of her hiring process, including HR records of every interview. But it was Rachel's discovery that delivered the final blow. And now, Liv continued, her voice growing stronger, I'd like to discuss what my investigation has uncovered about the person behind these allegations. 2 years ago, Max Thornton was involved in a similar situation at Regional Theater Company. A female director who rejected his advances suddenly found her reputation in tatters. She left the industry. I have her sworn statement here. The color drained from several executives' faces as they realized the implications. If they fired her based on false allegations, while evidence showed a pattern of retaliatory behavior from her accuser. Miss Morgan, James Chen spoke for the first time, a hint of admiration in his voice. This is impressive work. But the damage to the network's reputation is nothing compared to the damage you'll face if you punish a woman for being the target of documented defamation, Liv finished. Especially given the current cultural climate. Imagine the headlines, network fires female anchor based on debunked smear campaign. I can name 5 journalists who'd love to run that story. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. However, I have an alternative proposal. An exclusive series investigating toxic behavior and retaliation in the entertainment industry. Real victims, real stories, real change. The research is already done. She met each executive's eyes. This could be a scandal, or it could be your highest-rated series of the year. Your choice. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, James Chen laughed. I knew I hired you for a reason. He turned to his colleagues. She's right. This is an opportunity, not a crisis. As the meeting wrapped up, with not only her job secure but a green light for her investigative series, Liv felt a weight lift from her shoulders. But her victory was bittersweet. The man she'd loved had shown his true colors, and the pain of that betrayal still felt like broken glass in her chest. Walking to her office, she passed the studio where Max had filmed a commercial last month. Through the window, she saw him rehearsing with the director of his dream project, the role he'd been bragging about landing. She allowed herself a small smile. Rachel's investigation had turned up some interesting connections there too. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel, ready to go nuclear. Liv took a deep breath, remembering every time Max had made her feel small, every achievement he'd diminished, every moment she'd dulled her shine to soothe his ego. Yes, she typed back. It's time. The story Liv had meticulously crafted began spreading through entertainment circles like wildfire. Anonymous sources detailed a pattern of manipulation and coercion in casting decisions at several prominent theaters. While Max wasn't named directly, the evidence painted a damning picture of an actor who'd used personal relationships to sabotage others' careers while advancing his own. Sitting in her new office at Morning Pulse, Liv watched the industry chat rooms light up with discussions. Former victims began sharing their stories, emboldened by the revelations. The director of Max's dream project announced creative differences and recast the role. His agent stopped returning calls. But victory felt hollow. Late at night, alone in her apartment, Liv found herself staring at old photos, remembering the good times that now felt tainted. Had any of it been real? The way he'd held her after her father's funeral, the surprise birthday parties, the lazy Sunday mornings. Had it all been manipulation? Rachel found her one evening, still at her desk long after the studio had emptied. "You need to see this," she said, placing a laptop in front of Liv. The screen showed security footage from 3 months ago, Max in James Chen's office, attempting to pitch himself for a network drama. The rejection was polite but firm. The footage continued, showing Max's expression darkening as he left, his fist clenching around his phone. "The timestamp," Rachel pointed out. "It's 20 minutes before he first started spreading rumors about you and James." Liv felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. He didn't just want to hurt me, she realized. He wanted revenge on James too. 2 birds, 1 stone. "There's more," Rachel hesitated. "Remember Andrea Sullivan? The theater director who left the industry? She's willing to go on record. And she's not the only one." The weight of responsibility settled on Liv's shoulders. Her personal pain had unveiled a larger pattern of abuse within the industry. She had a platform now, a voice that could make a difference. But using it would mean reliving her own trauma, exposing her private heartbreak to millions. That night, she called her sister Claire, who had survived her own toxic relationship years ago. "How did you know when it was time to tell your story?" Liv asked. "When I realized my silence was protecting him more than it was protecting me," Claire answered softly. "When I understood that speaking up might help someone else find their strength." The next morning, Liv began writing the script for her first major investigative piece. Behind the spotlight, power, abuse, and survival in the entertainment industry. Her hands shook as she typed, but her voice remained steady as she recorded the voiceover. The series would feature multiple stories, multiple voices. Andrea Sullivan would speak first, followed by others. Liv's own story would come last, not because it was most important, but because it would tie everything together, showing how patterns of abuse repeated across the industry. As she worked, messages began arriving from unexpected sources. Other journalists offering support and additional leads. Actors sharing their own experiences. Network executives from competing channels praising her courage. But the message that broke her came from a young production assistant: "Watching you stand up to him gave me the courage to leave my abusive boyfriend. Thank you for showing me it's possible to rebuild." Liv sat at her desk, tears falling onto her keyboard, understanding finally that healing wasn't just about surviving, it was about helping others find their way to freedom too. Her phone buzzed, Max again, his first contact in weeks. "We need to talk," he wrote. "I can explain everything." Liv stared at the message, feeling the old pull, the desire to believe in his excuses. Then she thought of Andrea Sullivan, of the young production assistant, of every person who would watch her series and see their own story reflected back at them. "No," she typed back. "You've said enough." Then she blocked his number and returned to her script. She had work to do. The studio lights felt unusually harsh that morning as Liv prepared for the biggest broadcast of her career. Her investigative series, Behind the Spotlight, had touched a nerve in the industry, generating more viewer response than any program in Morning Pulse's history. Today's episode would be the most personal, her own story. In the makeup chair, she studied her reflection, remembering the woman she'd been just months ago. The one who had dimmed her light, who had second-guessed every achievement, who had twisted herself into knots trying to soothe a man's fragile ego. That woman felt like a stranger now. 5 minutes, Ms. Morgan, called the floor director. Rachel appeared at her side, squeezing her shoulder. "Andrea Sullivan is here. She's watching from the green room with the others." The others, survivors who had come forward, each with their own story of manipulation and recovery. They had formed an unofficial support network, meeting weekly for coffee, sharing resources, celebrating each other's victories. Their strength had become Liv's strength. Breaking news came in this morning, Rachel added hesitantly. Max's new project, the funding fell through. Apparently, some of the investors saw our preliminary coverage and pulled out. Liv absorbed this information without reaction. There was a time when Max's setbacks would have torn her apart, when she would have rushed to comfort him, to help him strategize, to shoulder his pain. Now she felt only a distant sadness for the man she had once loved, who had chosen power over partnership. The red light on camera 1 blinked on. Liv took her place at the anchor desk, heart pounding but voice steady as she began, "Good morning. Today we conclude our series on power dynamics in the entertainment industry with a story I never expected to tell, my own." For the next hour, she laid bare the subtle progression of emotional manipulation, the way success had become something to apologize for, the calculated destruction of her professional reputation. But more importantly, she highlighted the journey back to herself, the allies who had stood by her, the strength she had discovered, the healing power of speaking truth. As she spoke, messages flooded the studio's social media feeds. Women sharing similar experiences. Men examining their own behavior. Industry veterans calling for systematic change. The goal of this series was never about revenge, Liv concluded, looking directly into the camera. It's about breaking the silence that protects abusers. It's about showing others they're not alone. Most importantly, it's about reclaiming our right to shine without dimming ourselves for someone else's comfort. After the broadcast, Andrea Sullivan met her in the hallway, eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered, pulling Liv into a fierce hug. "You actually did it." Beyond Andrea stood a group of women, survivors featured in the series, each one carrying a story of loss and redemption. They had become more than sources or subjects. They had become family. Later that evening, as Liv packed up her office, she found a letter slipped under her door. The return address made her breath catch. It was from the theater company where Max had first begun his pattern of manipulation. Inside was a simple note from the board of directors: "We're launching a full investigation. Thank you for showing us what we refused to see." Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel: "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Network wants to make the series permanent. Weekly investigations into industry abuse. You as executive producer and host." Liv smiled, remembering Max's words about her upcoming stardom: "Everyone will know your name." He had meant it as a threat, never imagining she would turn that visibility into a platform for change. She typed back to Rachel, "I'll be there. And I know exactly what story we need to tell next." The boardroom buzzed with anticipation as Liv prepared for the Network Excellence Awards presentation. 6 months had passed since Behind the Spotlight first aired, transforming from a limited series into a groundbreaking weekly program that had become the industry's moral compass. Tonight, she would accept the award for outstanding investigative journalism. Looking around the room, she saw faces that had become dear to her: Rachel, now her executive producer; Andrea Sullivan, who had returned to directing and just wrapped her first feature film; Sarah from makeup, who had become one of her closest confidants. But most importantly, she saw the faces of survivors who had shared their stories, each one representing countless others who had found their voice through the show. As she approached the podium, the weight of her journey settled over her like a familiar blanket. The memories washed over her: the devastating betrayal, the nights spent rebuilding her shattered confidence, the slow, painful process of reclaiming her narrative. But also the unexpected moments of grace, the colleagues who had become family, the strangers who had become allies, the wounds that had become wisdom. "When I began this journey," she started, her voice clear and strong, "I thought I was telling a story about power and betrayal in the entertainment industry. What I discovered was something far more profound, a story about the transformative power of truth, the healing that comes from collective courage, and the strength we find when we stop hiding our scars." She paused, scanning the audience. "This award isn't just for our show. It's for every person who has ever felt silenced, diminished, or erased. It's for every survivor who has watched their abuser succeed while they struggled to rebuild. It's for every person who has ever doubted whether speaking up was worth the cost." In the back of the room, she spotted a familiar face: the young production assistant who had left her abusive boyfriend. She was now a junior producer on another network show, her talent finally recognized. Their eyes met, and they shared a smile of understanding. But most importantly, Liv continued, this award represents a fundamental shift in our industry. We're no longer content with stories that glamorize toxic behavior or normalize abuse. We're demanding better, from our colleagues, from our institutions, and from ourselves. As she spoke, she thought of Max. She had heard he was doing regional theater now, his star having fallen after multiple sources corroborated the pattern of behavior she had exposed. The last time she saw him, he was leaving an audition, looking older and somehow smaller. For a moment, their eyes had met across the street. He had started to approach her, but she had simply turned and walked away, finally free of the need for either confrontation or closure. In conclusion, she said, holding the award high, I want to share something I've learned. Our deepest wounds, when transformed by courage and compassion, become our greatest source of strength. They become the light by which others find their way home. The applause was thunderous, but Liv barely heard it. Her eyes were fixed on the group of women in the corner, her survivors' circle, as she called them. They were standing, tears streaming down their faces, holding each other. In their eyes, she saw not just appreciation for her words, but recognition of their own journey, their own triumph. After the ceremony, they gathered in her office, the same office where she had once sat alone, piecing together the shards of her broken dreams. Now it was filled with laughter, with friendship, with the kind of deep understanding that only comes from shared healing. Rachel raised a glass. To truth, she said simply. To courage, added Andrea. To tomorrow, Liv finished, looking at the award on her desk. Not an ending, she realized, but a beginning. There were more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, more lives to touch. Her phone buzzed with a message from the network president, new story idea. Major industry figure. Multiple accusations. Need your team on this. Liv smiled, feeling the familiar fire of purpose igniting in her chest. Ready? She asked her assembled family. Their collective response was immediate and unanimous, always. The night stretched ahead, full of possibility. They had work to do, stories to tell, wrongs to right. But most importantly, they had each other, a circle of strength that no force could break, a light that no darkness could dim. Let's begin, Liv said, and opened her laptop to start writing.